The date etched into the official records, June 10th, 2008, began like countless others in the quiet, tree-lined suburbs of Aurora, Colorado. The morning sun cast long shadows across manicured lawns, hinting at a day of routine and predictability. But that illusion of normalcy was abruptly, violently shattered by the piercing urgency of a 911 call. At the heart of this unfolding drama was a woman named Miriam Helmick. Her voice, though conveying a tremor of distress, possessed a remarkable, almost clinical, precision as she delivered the devastating news. Her husband, Allan Helmick, was dead. She recounted finding him. She explained, sprawled on the cool linoleum of their kitchen floor, a dark, viscous pool of congealed blood spreading ominously beneath his head. The sight, she detailed with an unsettling clarity, suggested a horrific end. It looked, she told the dispatcher, as if he had been shot, specifically in the back of the head. This particular detail, delivered so early and with such unblinking certainty, would later resonate with detectives as a subtle, yet significant, anomaly in the narrative of shock and grief. Within moments, the tranquil suburban street erupted into a chaotic tableau of flashing lights and urgent activity. Patrol cars, their red and blue strobes painting the quiet neighborhood in stark, pulsing hues, converged on the Helmick residence. The once private, unremarkable home transformed instantaneously into a sealed-off crime scene, its interior now laid bare to the scrutinizing eyes of law enforcement, paramedics, and forensic specialists. First responders, entering with a blend of professional urgency and quiet apprehension, were met with a scene that appeared, on the surface, to scream robbery. Drawers in the kitchen and living areas had been violently, almost excessively, pulled open, their contents, personal documents, trinkets, mundane household items, strewn across the floor in a chaotic mosaic. Overturned trash bins lay on their sides, their refuse spilling out in an apparent frenzy of a desperate search for valuables. It was a tableau of forced chaos, a picture of domestic disruption carefully arranged to suggest the violent intrusion of an unknown assailant. A single, gleaming .25 caliber bullet casing lay conspicuously next to Allan's lifeless body, almost too perfectly placed, a silent, chilling testament to the violence that had just unfolded, seemingly a definitive clue left behind by the perpetrator. The immediate impression was clear: a break-in gone terribly wrong, a husband caught in the crossfire of a violent theft. However, seasoned investigators are trained to look beyond the surface, to seek the nuanced discrepancies that disrupt the obvious narrative. While the initial impression was indeed that of a robbery, a subtle, almost imperceptible dissonance began to resonate with their experienced instincts. The disarray, while extensive, felt strangely inorganic, almost too deliberate in its presentation. There was an artificiality to the chaos, a sense that it had been carefully orchestrated rather than born of genuine, desperate action. As detectives moved through the home, their eyes scanning for inconsistencies, they noted that no obvious high-value items appeared to be missing. Furthermore, the points of entry into the residence showed no signs of forced access that truly correlated with the scale of the supposed ransacking. The windows were intact, the doors unbreached, save for the one Miriam would have used. This early, almost imperceptible off-ness, this feeling that the scene was not quite right, became the first insidious seed of doubt to take root in the minds of the lead detectives. It was the quiet suspicion that the stage had been set, and the actors were not who they appeared to be. Miriam Helmick, throughout the grueling initial hours of the investigation, maintained an unnerving composure that struck many as profoundly atypical for a woman who had just discovered her husband brutally murdered. While overwhelming grief and emotional turmoil would have been a natural, even expected, reaction, her demeanor was one of calculated calm, almost a preternatural preparedness for the barrage of questions. She answered every inquiry posed by the responding officers, and later, by the more probing detectives, with a steady voice and an almost unsettling clarity. Her narrative was consistent, unwavering, and seemingly bulletproof. She presented a meticulously constructed alibi, a detailed timeline of her movements that morning, designed to firmly place her outside the home at the estimated time of Allan's death. This alibi was not merely verbal. It was corroborated by a series of tangible, seemingly irrefutable pieces of evidence. Itemized receipts from various errands she claimed to have run, precise voicemail timestamps that recorded her communication outside the residence, and crucially, extensive cell tower data that, at first glance, appeared to confirm her physical absence from the immediate vicinity of the crime scene. On the surface, her alibi was, quite simply, rock solid, leaving little apparent room for doubt and effectively placing her beyond the immediate frame of suspicion, adding another layer of complexity to the initial stages of the investigation. Standard forensic tests conducted on Miriam yielded no immediate, incriminating evidence that could directly link her to the violence. Gunshot residue, GSR, analysis, a key forensic tool designed to detect microscopic particles of burnt gunpowder on a person's skin or clothing after firing a weapon, came back negative for Miriam. This result suggested she had not recently discharged a firearm. Similarly, blood spatter analysis, a meticulous examination designed to detect minute traces of blood that might have been propelled onto a person from a violent act, also showed no indication that Miriam had been in close proximity to the fatal shot. This initial lack of direct forensic evidence seemed to further strengthen her position as a grieving widow, a tragic victim of circumstance rather than a potential perpetrator. The early facts, as they presented themselves, seemed to point away from her. Yet in the quiet, almost subconscious observations of the seasoned detectives, her unwavering composure, her almost preternatural preparedness, the slightly artificial nature of the crime scene, and the absence of any obvious emotional breakdown continued to nag at them. These subtle dissonances created a quiet, persistent hum of suspicion, a feeling that this was not a straightforward case. The meticulous staging, the seemingly perfect alibi, the lack of direct physical evidence. These elements, while intended to mislead, instead began to sow the first tangible, undeniable seeds of doubt in the minds of the investigators. The narrative of a simple robbery, while initially compelling, already held faint, unsettling whispers of something far more complex, something meticulously manufactured. The true story of Allan Helmick's death was only just beginning to reveal itself. As the initial shock of Allan Helmick's murder began to settle, and the quiet doubts about Miriam's story began to coalesce among the investigators, Miriam herself introduced a new, startling detail into the narrative. It was a seemingly peripheral event from mere weeks prior, which she presented as yet another instance of them being targeted, further cementing her image as a traumatized survivor. In a measured conversation with detectives, she recounted a terrifying incident from just 6 weeks before Allan's death. This wasn't a minor detail, a fleeting moment of distress. It was a bizarre and profoundly disturbing attempt on their property, if not their lives, that had occurred far from their Aurora home, in the small, distant town of Delta, Colorado, where they had been visiting. Miriam described a brazen attempt to torch their car, an account she delivered with chilling specificity. She detailed how a lit skewer, she explained, had been deliberately shoved into the gas tank of their vehicle, accompanied by some form of gauze or cloth wrapped around it to act as a rudimentary wick. It was a crude yet potentially catastrophic incendiary device, designed to transform their car into a fiery trap, potentially with them inside. The method itself was highly unusual, lacking the brute force of typical arson and suggesting a more cunning, perhaps even experimental, approach. The timing of this incident was also critical, a detail Miriam was quick to emphasize. It occurred, she noted, just after they had successfully completed the sale of Allan's title company, an asset that had yielded them a substantial check exceeding $100,000. This significant financial transaction, preceding the attempted arson, immediately piqued the investigators' interest. If someone had tried to set their car on fire, particularly after a substantial influx of cash, it strongly suggested a calculated, premeditated attack, a specific threat aimed directly at their wealth or their lives, rather than a random act of vandalism. It pointed to the chilling possibility that Allan, and by extension, Miriam, had been targeted for weeks, perhaps even months, before the fatal shooting in their kitchen. Miriam, however, continued to profess complete ignorance regarding the identity or motives of such a perpetrator. She claimed no enemies, no conceivable reason why anyone would wish them harm. Her bewildered facade remained intact, her composure a shield against the growing suspicion surrounding her. She maintained the stance of a bewildered victim, offering theories of a mysterious assailant who seemingly had a grudge against them. Meanwhile, the detectives, now viewing the murder scene and this new information through a different, more cynical lens, revisited their initial assessment of simple robbery. The disarray of drawers and overturned bins was no longer seen as the chaotic aftermath of a genuine break-in. It was unequivocally a ruse, a theatrical setup designed to mislead. What struck them most profoundly was the oddly cinematic quality of the entire scene, a pervasive feeling that it mimicked something from a movie rather than a genuine, desperate act of violence. This observation, though subtle at first, would prove profoundly significant as the investigation deepened, hinting at an external source of inspiration for Miriam's actions. Then, just as the investigation seemed to be settling into a pattern of questioning Miriam and revisiting old leads, a new piece of evidence surfaced, delivered by Miriam herself. It was presented as another instance of a desperate widow turning over every stone, hoping to spur the police into action against a phantom assailant. She reported finding a chilling greeting card tucked conspicuously under her doormat. Its message was stark, a terse, menacing promise designed to terrify. Allan's first. You're next. Run, run, run. The envelope, which Miriam's lawyer meticulously presented to the police, bore an equally unsettling inscription, to the grieving widow. This note, clearly intended to suggest a continued threat against Miriam and to solidify her victim status, was meant to propel the police to search for a phantom assailant who was still at large, seemingly terrorizing her. But for the seasoned investigators, the note felt too convenient, almost too perfectly aligned with Miriam's carefully crafted narrative of being a targeted survivor. The wording, the delivery, the very existence of such a direct and perfectly timed threat so soon after the murder, all struck a deeply discordant note. Their suspicions, already simmering, sharpened considerably when they obtained and meticulously reviewed surveillance camera footage from a nearby store. This footage, taken at the exact time the note was supposedly left on Miriam's doormat, contained an unexpected, yet utterly revealing detail. In the background of the grainy images, unobscured by anything, was Miriam Helmick herself. She was clearly visible, subtly positioned, confirming her presence near the scene at the very moment she claimed to have merely discovered the anonymous, terrifying message. The woman claiming to be terrorized by a mysterious assailant was, in fact, the one creating the terror, staging yet another piece of false evidence. Confronted with this undeniable, irrefutable evidence of her deception, Miriam's composure finally cracked. Her carefully constructed facade, which had held so steadfastly through days of questioning, crumbled, revealing a calculated manipulator beneath. She admitted, without much room for denial given the irrefutable video evidence, that she had indeed faked the threatening card. Her justification was chillingly pragmatic, delivered with a surprising lack of genuine remorse or apparent understanding of its gravity. She simply wanted to get the police to pay attention. This confession, rather than explaining her motives, instantly and irrevocably turned the investigation sharply against her. The focus shifted entirely and decisively. No longer was she the innocent victim of a heinous crime. She was now undeniably the primary suspect, a woman proven capable of orchestrating an elaborate charade to manipulate a murder investigation. The meticulously staged robbery, the bizarrely detailed car fire, the manufactured threat card, all now pointed to a singular, cold-blooded orchestrator, a woman meticulously weaving a sophisticated, deadly web of deception around herself. The true depths of her calculated deceit were only beginning to surface. With Miriam Helmick's calculated deception now exposed, the investigators shifted their focus from the immediate crime to the deeper history of Allan and Miriam's relationship, and crucially, Miriam's own past. They needed to understand the context, the patterns, and the potential motivations that could drive such intricate malice. Key to this deepening inquiry were Allan's adult children from a previous marriage. Their insights, provided with a mixture of grief and simmering frustration, painted a profoundly disturbing picture that fundamentally challenged Miriam's carefully crafted portrayal of their home life and Allan's final, mysterious months. Allan's children expressed deep-seated concern and a palpable sense of helplessness regarding their father's recent transformation. They described how their once vibrant, engaged, and independent father had become increasingly distant and isolated in the months leading up to his death. His once frequent calls, his spontaneous visits, and his active participation in family life dwindled to almost nothing. These interactions were replaced by an unsettling, almost suffocating pattern of communication. If they wanted to reach Allan, they had to go through Miriam. She effectively acted as a gatekeeper, often fielding calls, relaying messages, and creating a formidable barrier that had never existed before. This deliberate isolation was a significant red flag, suggesting a calculated effort to control Allan's interactions and information flow. More alarmingly, Allan, a man known for his robust health, his energetic disposition, and his active lifestyle, had begun complaining of frequent, mysterious illnesses. He was constantly feeling unwell, exhibiting a range of vague yet persistent symptoms that seemed to sap his energy, diminish his spirit, and confine him to the home. This sudden and prolonged decline in health was entirely out of character for him. His children openly voiced their suspicions to the police. They firmly believed Miriam was systematically isolating him, cutting him off from the people who cared about him most, effectively creating a controlled, almost captive environment around him. This narrative of a slow, creeping isolation was not just a symptom of a failing relationship. It was a grave indicator, suggesting a prolonged campaign of control and, chillingly, potential harm designed to weaken him both physically and socially. As detectives dug deeper, peeling back the layers of Miriam's personal history, a truly chilling pattern began to emerge. Then came the revelation that sent a palpable jolt through the entire investigation team. A detail so profound it seemed to pull the entire case into a terrifying, familiar echo. Miriam's first husband, Jack Giles, had also died under incredibly suspicious circumstances. The parallels were too striking to be dismissed as mere coincidence. Just like Allan, Jack had suffered a fatal gunshot wound to the head. And, eerily, he too had been found deceased in bed next to Miriam. His death, however, had been officially ruled a suicide, a judgment that now, in light of Allan's murder, screamed of profound injustice and potential manipulation. The circumstances surrounding Jack's supposed suicide were immediately subjected to intense scrutiny, and they were found to be riddled with inexplicable inconsistencies and profound conflicts of interest. Crucially, the investigation into Jack's death had been spearheaded by none other than Miriam's own half-brother, than a local law enforcement officer. This immediate familial connection cast a long, dark shadow over the entire original inquiry, raising major ethical and procedural red flags for the current detectives. How thorough was the investigation when conducted by a direct family member of a key witness? Furthermore, a critical, physical detail emerged. Jack Giles was definitively left-handed, yet the fatal shot that ended his life was reportedly fired with his right hand. Such a glaring discrepancy in a supposed self-inflicted gunshot wound was simply too profound, too illogical to ignore. It hinted strongly at a potential cover-up, a calculated manipulation of the legal system, perhaps by an individual with a vested interest in absolving Miriam of any culpability. The striking, almost identical parallels between the deaths of her two husbands were no longer coincidental anomalies. They now pointed to a terrifying, almost undeniable pattern, a chilling blueprint of repeated violence, meticulously hidden beneath layers of plausible deniability. Adding another disquieting layer to Miriam's character and her potential motivations was her behavior in the immediate aftermath of Allan's death. While one might expect a period of profound grief, shock, and mourning, Miriam's actions suggested a jarring lack of emotional response. Instead of retreating into bereavement, she had already begun dating someone new. She had met this individual online, a seemingly wealthy man, and was pursuing a romantic relationship with him with alarming speed and apparent enthusiasm. Friends and family members of Allan expressed their profound shock and dismay at this behavior, finding her quick transition into a new romance disturbingly rapid, insensitive, and utterly devoid of the expected respect for the recently deceased. It spoke volumes about her capacity for emotional detachment and her potentially opportunistic nature, a relentless pursuit of financial security or comfort regardless of the human cost. Further investigations into Allan's personal habits and possessions also yielded critical information, providing a potential physical link to the murder. Allan's children recalled that their father kept a .25 caliber pistol in his sock drawer, a common, if not slightly cliché, place for someone to store a personal firearm within the home. This detail was of immense significance because the very same caliber weapon had been used in Allan's murder. Yet, despite extensive searches of the Helmick home and surrounding property by law enforcement, the gun was never found. Its disappearance solidified suspicions. If Miriam was indeed the perpetrator, the missing weapon strongly suggested a deliberate and calculated attempt to remove incriminating evidence from the crime scene. The cumulative weight of these revelations, Allan's forced isolation, the eerie parallels with Jack Giles's death, the suspicious details surrounding that first tragedy, Miriam's immediate foray into a new, potentially lucrative relationship, and the unsettling absence of the murder weapon, began to solidify a devastating portrait of Miriam Helmick. She was not a hapless victim. She was increasingly, and terrifyingly, emerging as the cunning architect of a dark and deadly plan, operating under the radar for years. With the compelling evidence of Miriam's manipulative behavior, Allan's isolation, and the chilling echoes from her past, investigators had built a strong circumstantial case. But they still needed undeniable proof of her premeditation and a definitive link to the murder weapon. The modern world, however, often leaves a trail that even the most cunning criminals cannot erase: their digital footprint. Obtaining a warrant, law enforcement meticulously combed through Miriam Helmick's computer and phone records, delving into her online search history and digital communications. What they unearthed was not merely incriminating. It was a deeply unsettling window into the mind of a methodical planner, laying bare a chillingly systematic approach to ending a life. The sheer volume and insidious nature of her online queries were staggering. Detectives discovered nearly 200 distinct online searches conducted in the months leading up to Allan's mysterious, debilitating illness. These were not random medical curiosities or generalized health inquiries. Instead, they were precise, calculated explorations of various drug overdoses. Miriam had repeatedly searched for terms like Viagra overdose, Ambien overdose, and lisinopril overdose. Even more disturbingly, she frequently combined these terms, probing into the effects of multiple drugs taken simultaneously, sometimes with specific dosages or symptom outcomes in mind. These were not the searches of a concerned spouse seeking cures for an ailing partner. They were the meticulous, systematic research of someone actively plotting to administer specific substances to a victim, understanding their lethal potential and how to achieve a fatal outcome. The implications of this digital trail were stark and horrifying. It strongly suggested that Miriam had not simply decided to kill Allan on a whim. Instead, investigators began to theorize that she had been systematically poisoning him slowly, attempting to induce a gradual decline that might be mistaken for a natural illness, a series of unfortunate accidents, or simply the effects of aging. The mysterious ailments Allan had suffered, the ones that had worried his children and made him increasingly isolated, now took on a terrifying new meaning. his constant fatigue, his uncharacteristic weakness, the vague yet persistent symptoms that doctors had struggled to definitively diagnose. These were no longer just indicators of an unexplained illness, but potential manifestations of a prolonged, insidious campaign of poisoning. This was designed to weaken him, perhaps to kill him discreetly, or at the very least, to render him vulnerable before she resorted to the final, fatal act. This discovery transformed the case from a sudden, violent murder into a cold-blooded, premeditated plot that had unfolded over an extended period, a slow-burn assassination executed through calculated research and likely, repeated doses. The online searches were, in essence, a digital confession, a silent yet undeniable testament to a killer's long-held, evil intent. But the digital evidence, while powerful, still left the question of the missing murder weapon. Allan's .25 caliber pistol, which his children confirmed he kept in his sock drawer, remained elusive. This was a critical piece of the puzzle, a direct link between Miriam and the immediate act of violence. Then, a truly astonishing detail emerged from the depths of memory, provided with a mixture of hope and trepidation by one of Allan's daughters. She recounted an incident from nearly 2 decades prior, a seemingly innocuous argument in 1989 involving her grandfather. During this heated exchange, her grandfather, in a moment of frustration or perhaps a desperate display of dominance, had fired a gun into the lawn of their property. It was a fleeting, dramatic moment in their family history, long forgotten by most, perhaps dismissed as a mere eccentric oddity. But for investigators, this seemingly random recollection, a whisper from the past, sparked an idea that was as audacious as it was potentially groundbreaking. Acting on this slender thread of memory, detectives returned to the property with specialized equipment. They deployed metal detectors, systematically sweeping the entire expanse of the lawn, a painstaking process of searching for a tiny, metallic anomaly buried beneath years of accumulated soil, leaves, and grass roots. It was a monumental long shot, a genuine needle-in-a-haystack endeavor that required immense persistence, unwavering belief, and a meticulous approach. For hours, they traversed the yard, the rhythmic, monotonous beeping of the detectors scanning the ground beneath them. And then, against all odds, the signal changed. There was a distinct, undeniable positive hit, a high-pitched alert that cut through the silence. Digging carefully, meticulously, through layers of compacted dirt, intertwined roots, and old debris, they unearthed a small, corroded object. It was a bullet, remarkably preserved despite its long interment in the earth. The discovery itself was a testament to extraordinary investigative dedication, but its true significance lay in what it could reveal under the microscopic lens of forensic science. This old, forgotten projectile, fired decades ago, was immediately and reverently sent to the ballistics lab for rigorous, scientific examination. The ballistics experts went to work, their precise instruments analyzing the unique striations and markings etched onto the bullet. Every firearm leaves a distinct signature on the projectiles it fires, much like a fingerprint. These microscopic imperfections, caused by the barrel's rifling and manufacturing defects, are unique to each weapon, imprinting themselves onto the bullet as it travels down the barrel. The experts meticulously compared the markings on the ancient bullet found in the lawn to those on the fatal bullet extracted from Allan Helmick's body during the autopsy. The anticipation was palpable. If these markings matched, it would mean that the same gun, the elusive .25 caliber pistol that had been in Allan's sock drawer and had vanished after his death, was responsible for both shots, one from a decades-old family argument, and the other, tragically, the one that ended Allan's life. The results, when they came back, were conclusive and electrifying. Ballistics revealed that the bullet found in the lawn had similar, distinct markings to the bullet that killed Allan. While a perfect, unimpeachable match could only be definitively confirmed with the original gun itself, the similarities were so profound, the striations so consistent, that it provided a near-certain link. This wasn't just a .25 caliber gun that Allan owned. It was almost beyond doubt the very same gun that Miriam had almost certainly removed from the scene after his murder. This extraordinary discovery provided a tangible, physical link to the murder weapon, strengthening the case against Miriam immeasurably. It was the moment a forgotten echo from the past became a damning piece of evidence, speaking volumes about Miriam's role in Allan's death and giving investigators a powerful, undeniable tool to unravel her elaborate deceptions. The bullet, once a forgotten relic, now bore silent, undeniable testimony to a brutal act and its careful, desperate concealment. With the digital confession of slow poisoning and the astonishing ballistic link to Allan's own missing firearm, the case against Miriam Helmick was nearing its chilling conclusion. But the meticulous work of the investigators wasn't done. The underlying motive beyond mere control and deceit, often resides in the cold, hard figures of financial gain. And in Miriam's case, the pursuit of money proved to be as calculated and ruthless as her methods of murder. Detectives initiated a deep dive into Miriam's financial records, a painstaking, laborious process of scrutinizing bank statements, check registers, and credit card transactions. This wasn't a quick glance. It involved tracking every withdrawal, every deposit, every signature. What they unearthed painted a clear, compelling, and utterly damning picture of systematic financial fraud against her husband, Allan. They discovered she had methodically written forged checks totaling over $40,000 from Allan's personal accounts. This wasn't a one-time, desperate act born of sudden need. It was a series of calculated thefts, meticulously hidden within the seemingly legitimate flow of their shared finances. The timeline of these forgeries often coincided with periods when Allan's health was mysteriously declining, suggesting she was taking advantage of his weakened state or perhaps attempting to exhaust his funds before he became fully incapacitated. This revelation provided the missing, crucial piece of the puzzle, a powerful and undeniable reason for Allan's sudden and violent end. Miriam had likely murdered Allan precisely to prevent him from discovering her elaborate scheme. Had he uncovered the theft, his suspicions would have surely turned to her, and her carefully constructed life of deceit would have crumbled. Just as she had financially benefited from the dubious suicide of her first husband, Jack Giles, Miriam now stood to gain substantially from Allan's death, ensuring the fraud remained hidden and she maintained control over his assets and life insurance policies. The theft was not merely a side detail. It became a central, driving force behind her actions, a calculated elimination of a man who was about to expose her. But the financial motive, while potent and undeniable, was not the only chilling discovery that cemented Miriam's diabolical planning and revealed the truly twisted depths of her mind. The meticulous nature of her crimes, from the elaborately staged robbery to the bizarrely specific attempted car fire, strongly suggested a mind that drew inspiration from unsettling sources, a theatricality that transcended mere opportunism. As investigators continued to piece together the precise timeline of events leading up to Allan's murder, a small, seemingly innocuous detail from their recent past surfaced, a piece of information that, once understood, sent shivers down their spines and pulled the entire intricate plot into a horrifyingly sharp focus. They learned that just 4 days before the failed car explosion attempt in Delta, Colorado, the one where a lit skewer was shoved into the gas tank of their vehicle, a detail Miriam herself had recounted, Miriam and Allan had rented a specific, highly acclaimed film, No Country for Old Men. This seemingly casual detail was anything but. For anyone familiar with the critically acclaimed Coen Brothers film, the connection was instant, jarring, and profoundly terrifying. No Country for Old Men features a particularly memorable and gruesome scene involving a car explosion. In this scene, a character orchestrates the vehicle's fiery destruction by, with chilling precision, inserting a wick into the gas tank, a method that precisely, undeniably, and shockingly mirrored Miriam's description of the attempt on her own car. The discovery of this movie rental solidified the investigators' growing suspicion that Miriam was not merely a clever opportunist, but a calculated mimic. She hadn't just conceived of these plans in a vacuum. She had drawn direct, chilling inspiration from popular culture, meticulously recreating cinematic violence in her own real life. It was a terrifying testament to her emotional detachment, her audacity, and her utter lack of originality, transforming her crimes from a tragic domestic dispute into a macabre performance, directly inspired by the very narratives designed for entertainment. This final, irrefutable piece of evidence, the direct link between her attempted arson and a chilling scene from a widely viewed movie, served as a powerful, undeniable confirmation of her profound premeditation and the truly twisted depths of her evil plan. This plan was not only cunning and cold-blooded, but had seemingly borrowed its most inventive and disturbing elements directly from the darkest corners of cinematic fiction. The complete picture of Miriam Helmick was now horrifyingly clear. A cold, calculating killer, driven by insatiable greed and eerily influenced by the very movies meant for public consumption, blurring the line between fiction and a horrifying reality. With the convergence of overwhelming evidence, the undeniable digital footprint of poisoning research, the chilling ballistic match connecting Allan's own gun to a decades-old bullet, the irrefutable proof of Miriam's financial fraud, and the macabre discovery of her cinematic inspiration for the attempted arson. The meticulously woven tapestry of Miriam Helmick's deception finally unraveled. The days of speculation and suspicion culminated in a swift, decisive action. 6 months after Allan Helmick's brutal murder, the net tightened around her. Law enforcement officers moved in, and Miriam Helmick was arrested. The charges leveled against her were severe, reflecting the calculated nature of her crimes. First-degree murder for Allan's death, attempted murder for the car fire in Delta, and forgery for the financial deceit. The courtroom in Colorado became the solemn stage for the final act of this chilling domestic drama. The prosecution, led by seasoned legal minds, meticulously laid out their case, weaving together every intricate piece of evidence into a devastating and coherent timeline of Miriam's calculated actions. They painted a stark portrait of a woman driven by insatiable greed and a shocking, almost inhuman, lack of empathy. Her very actions, they argued, demonstrated a chilling proficiency as a master manipulator who had systematically planned her husband's demise over an extended period. The prosecution detailed the moments immediately following the murder. Miriam, they asserted, had shot Allan in the back of the head, a cowardly and deliberate act. Following the fatal shot, with what must have been astonishing composure, she had methodically cleaned up any forensic traces from the crime scene, disposed of the murder weapon, and incinerated her clothing to destroy any potential blood evidence. Then, with chilling precision, she had embarked on a series of carefully planned errands, deliberately creating a false paper trail and manipulating cell tower data to establish her alibi, before calmly returning home and placing the 911 call, feigning shock and profound grief. The prosecution's narrative was seamless, terrifying in its implications, and powerfully presented, leaving little room for alternative explanations. Miriam Helmick, maintaining her facade of innocence and self-preservation to the very end, chose to take the stand in her own defense. Her testimony was a calculated denial of every single accusation. She flatly denied any knowledge of the .25 caliber pistol that Allan kept in his sock drawer and claimed she had no idea where it might have gone. She vehemently denied stealing any money from Allan, dismissing the voluminous evidence of forged checks as fabrications or gross misunderstandings. In a desperate, almost pathetic attempt to deflect suspicion, she even suggested that Allan himself might have orchestrated the car fire incident, perhaps for insurance money. A claim so outlandish and self-serving it only served to highlight the depths of her desperation and her willingness to fabricate reality. Throughout her cross-examination, she remained outwardly confident, defiant, and unwavering in her denials, despite the overwhelming evidence presented against her. Adding a final, poignant, and somewhat tragic layer to the defense was the testimony of her son from her first marriage. He stood firmly by his mother, speaking directly to the jury about the woman he knew and loved. Unable or unwilling to reconcile that image with the monstrous accusations leveled against her. His unwavering support, though heartfelt and emotionally compelling, could not dismantle the towering mountain of circumstantial evidence that the prosecution had so meticulously built. After 16 days of compelling, often harrowing testimony, during which the jury heard every intricate detail of Miriam's manipulative behavior, the disturbing patterns of her past, and the overwhelming scientific and circumstantial evidence arrayed against her, the case finally went to deliberation. The jurors, tasked with the profound responsibility of deciding Miriam Helmick's fate, took surprisingly little time to reach their conclusion, a testament to the clarity and strength of the prosecution's case. After just 5 hours of deliberation, they returned to the courtroom, their faces etched with the solemnity of their decision. The verdict was delivered with quiet gravity, guilty on all counts. Miriam Helmick, the architect of a plan so intricate it seemed ripped from the pages of a crime thriller, a scheme inspired by a chilling movie plot, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice, though slow and painstakingly uncovered, had finally arrived for Allan Helmick and, perhaps, for the shadowed memory of Jack Giles. Since her conviction, all of Miriam's appeals have been systematically denied, sealing her fate and ensuring she will spend the rest of her days behind bars, her intricate, cinematic scheme ultimately unraveling to reveal the cold, hard truth of a calculating killer. The story of Allan Helmick's murder stands as a stark reminder of the meticulous, often hidden depths of human depravity and the relentless pursuit of justice that ultimately brings it to light. Like, share, and subscribe for more of the same.